welcome. Africa in recent years have increasingly found itself on the spotlight, with the world bearing witness to both surprising and worrying developments born out of a never-ending matchup between the rule of law and acts of impunity. Corruption in Africa has grown to become an institution in recent years, sustaining poverty, obstructing development, and ensuring political exclusion at all levels. This is Africa This Week, and I'm your guide, Fadishola Shotingwe. We start off the day with earlier in the week. Welcome on board. On Monday, the Nigerian Air Force said it deployed additional air assets to the northeast in search of the missing students of the Government Girls Science and Technical College in Dapchi, Yobe State. The Nigerian Air Force spokesperson Olatokunbo Adesonya disclosed this in a statement where he said the assets, including intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance platforms, which are part of renewed efforts to locate the girls. He said earlier deployments in search of the girls and covert operations which were carried out did not yield the desired results. The trial of more than 80 people implicated in a failed coup in 2015 in Burkina Faso opened in the capital Ouagadougou on Tuesday. The chief amongst them are a General Gilbert Diendere, accused of masterminding the coup, and a former foreign minister believed to have supported him. They face a variety of charges, including treason, undermining state security, as well as murder. The coup was carried out by former President Blaise Compaore's old presidential guard against the transitional government that took power after the veteran leader's fall. And after a week of protests against the coup, Diendere was forced to hand back power to the interim president. Michel Kafando was reinstated. The trial is widely seen as a test for democracy in Burkina Faso. Still on Tuesday, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa reshuffled his cabinet, adding new faces and removing some ministers allied to his predecessor, Jacob Zuma. Deputy President of the African National Congress, the ANC, David Mabuza, was named Deputy President of South Africa. And Nhlankla Nene, who was fired as Finance Minister in December 2015, has been returned to the ministry. Pravin Gordhan, who was sacked by Zuma last March, was also reappointed to the cabinet and handled the key public enterprises department, while Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who narrowly lost to Ramaphosa in an ANC leadership election last December, will be responsible for planning and monitoring.
Mr. David Mabuza, once the swearing-in process has been completed, will be sworn in as Deputy President of the Republic. Dr. Zweli Mkhize will, once the swearing-in process as a Member of Parliament has been completed, will be sworn in as Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. Mr. Nhlankla Nene will also, once sworn in as Minister, I intend to have him appointed as Minister of Finance.
At least 15 persons were killed and 40 others injured in a train crash in Egypt's northern province of Bahira on Wednesday. The crash occurred after two passenger carriages separated from one train and collided with a cargo train. The Prime Minister, Sharif Ismail, ordered the Transport Minister to visit the scene and take action. Egyptians have long complained that successive governments have failed to enforce basic safety standards for the railways. A string of crashes have further inflamed public anger over the outdated transport network. On Thursday, the National Assembly set to revisit the Devolution of Powers Amendment that it had initially thrown out during voting to amend the 1999 Constitution last year. The leadership of the Parliament disclosed this while receiving from the Conference of Speakers the final alteration of the Constitution by the 36 state houses of assembly on Thursday in Abuja.
fourth alteration of the 1999 Constitution has been on since the resumption of the 8th National Assembly. After the amendment by federal lawmakers, it was transmitted to the 36 state houses of assembly.
Thank you very much, sir. Right Honorable Yakubu Dogara.
The state assemblies have now returned the 15 clauses that form the fourth alteration back to the federal legislature in line with constitutional amendment procedures.
On behalf of the constituents, we want to plead that the bill on devolution of powers be reconsidered and form part of the next proposed amendments to the Constitution.
After a request by the state lawmakers on the need to revisit the devolution of power so as to restructure Nigeria, the National Assembly told them that the process was ongoing.
We had set up a joint committee both in the House and the Senate to look at the areas where we had differences. And I'm informed that in the next couple of weeks, that report will be presented to both the Senate and the House of Representatives. And very soon we'll be giving you new work to do. We'll be sending that to you again. And I'm sure with the way you have done this very quickly, we will receive very, very prompt response from you.
We have spoken through these documents that are before us. I don't think it would be right at any level, having passed through all these processes, for this to be returned without them, being translated into the provisions of the Constitution. I would hope that since the president is a very popular president, then the president is effectively tied, because he must do the wishes of the people who put him in that office.
What we have transmitted today represents what the people of this country want. And it is our sincere hope that the Mr. President will assent to this, because this is the wishes and the aspiration of the people of this country. We still insist that the power devolution must be brought back to the table for discussion.
The new amendment focuses on electoral justice, budgeting, and other critical constitutional reforms. This document is now set for transmission to President Muhammadu Buhari for his assent. Upon this assent, the Constitution will now be deemed to have been altered. Somna Sambu, TVC News, Abuja.
And 4 UN aid workers were killed on Friday after Boko Haram insurgents invaded Ran community in Kala Balge local government of Borno State. Another female aid worker was abducted while one other sustained injuries in the attack. UNICEF head of communications Samantha Newport confirmed the incident in Maiduguri. She said 2 of the deceased were contractors of the UN client organization, the International Organization of Migration, the IOM, deployed to Ran as camp managers. She added that others killed were a medical doctor working as a consultant with UNICEF and an aid worker with the International Committee of Red Cross affiliate organization. All the deceased personnel were Nigerians, and military authorities are yet to comment on the incident. Ethiopia's parliament gave its official consent to a state of emergency imposed after the Prime Minister announced his resignation. The state of emergency bans protests and restricts publications that could be deemed to incite violence. It was imposed on February the 16th, a day after Haile Mariam Desalegn announced his surprise resignation. The resignation was unprecedented in Ethiopia's modern history. Still on Friday, the Burkina Faso capital Ouagadougou went under attack. Gunfire and an explosion blackened the air around the army headquarters and French embassy in the capital. Witnesses reported seeing armed men getting out of a car and opening fire before heading towards the embassy. It was unclear who was behind the attack, but a statement by the police says special forces were in action. The U.S. Embassy in the city advised people to seek shelter. And with that, we have come to the end of Earlier in the Week. Up next is Digging Deep, and that will be after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Africa This Week. For every 60 minutes in Africa, 1 hour passes with the possibility of hearing at least one case of corruption in the news, featuring storylines of malpractice, mismanagement, and relentless abuse of office. But this time, unlike every other day, it is the latest corruption perception index released by Transparency International that has got African nations literally checking the results on the wall for the most corrupt of them all. Joining me to dig deep on Africa This Week is Adeniyi Kunu, researcher and social commentator. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what's your reaction on the level of corruption in Africa going by Transparency International?
Well, there is little to be surprised about because if you took the polls of the citizenry, you'd come to terms with the reality of their dissatisfaction, which is just not about mere reactions, but concrete reactions. According to the Transparency Index report, if you look at between the years 2012 and 2017, you'd find out that Nigeria has been swinging between 25, 27, 26 in terms of what the ratings of the country is over 100. And of course, when you write an examination and you score less than 40, which is let my people go score, that simply means it's an F9. And it's an F9 indeed for the country. But what I think is more important in this analysis is for the government of the day to accept the fact that it has not been able to improve. Permit me go to some other countries. Between the same years of 2012 and now, you'd find countries like Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and the United Kingdom improve significantly in their ratings. It is sad to say that countries like Yemen, Australia, which is of course a developed nation, and maybe Syria are countries that have not performed well, talking about the figures of 14, 12, and 9. But I have to say that for Africa, it is a sad taste on our birds. You have an average of about 32. For, South America and Central Asia, you'd have average of about 34. So
well, you mentioned this present government. They are wondering what criteria was used by Transparency International to arrive at this conclusion.
All right, if you look at it, what was used to analyze this would have to do with the perception of corruption by those who come into the country to do businesses. And obviously, you're talking about, the fact that somebody comes into the country with his or her money or an organization with the intention to do business. And for them to get the necessary paper that legalize their state, that legalize the fact they want to do business, they definitely cut corners. Why wouldn't they cut corners if you'd ask me? Simply because if you look at the 2016 budget, it performed far below 50%. That simply means the monies that should have gone into infrastructure, provision of the necessary tools that will enable people who work in government and the private sector function weren't provided. It then means that if people in government offices as well as private organizations go out of their way to get certain facilities of tools of their work, they will definitely, or there is a tendency already in place for them to cut corners to actually make the average or balance the books. If you come to 2017, the bone of contention, government has performed less than 35% on the budget, 7.44 trillion. It is unfortunate that even as we are in the year 2018, government has not been able to measure. That simply means we've had a carryover of a budget that actually performed far below average from 2016, and accumulation again in 2017, which is a complete weakening of government institutions that perhaps would have been strengthened enough if these budgets were properly executed. And it's going to have an overbearing influence, of course, on the various angles, particularly private sector, government institutions, and it's going to make life easier for people who do business. So I wouldn't want government to analyze or take this by saying that maybe it is the work of those people that don't like the government, but it's a reality in statistics that government must accept.
Well, talking about people who may not like the government, former President Olusegun Obasanjo is a member of the Advisory Council of Transparency International.
Yeah.
Do you think in any way there might be a link between him and the report?
Well, before Obasanjo came to power, I believe strongly that the Transparency International has been actually doing its own assessment of countries in terms of corruption index. And let us not forget as well that when Obasanjo was in power, obviously helping us to birth democracy again, let me say approximately 20 years ago now, Obasanjo himself didn't have his hands very clean in terms of his relationship with the media. Obasanjo actually is reputed for gross violation of judicial verdicts, particularly in his relationship with Lagos, where he needed to have actually, let go of the funds that should have been allocated to Lagos. So Obasanjo's presence there.
And the creation of more local government.
Exactly, I should tell you. And I think also that all of these things happening add up to it. But if you look at it, if you talk about corruption in Nigeria, we are quick to talk about what senators earn a year. That is more or less about 12-point-something million naira a year. Let's not forget all of the other newspaper allowances, entertainment allowances. Then you want all the bogus allowances and constituency allowances. Then you want to talk about the House of Rep member. The average person earns over 9 million a year. So that simply means in a year, 109 senators will account for about 2.56 billion naira. Then you talk about the House of Rep members, which of course their own will amount to over 8 billion naira. That tells you that the majority of people who occupy certain offices perhaps don't understand that that is an office where your selflessness should be tested and your patriotism. Now, the average graduate in this country that has spent 5 years, inclusive of the years of service, will earn 60,000 naira where they graduate to work for government. So if you did a calculation of 60,000 times 12 months, you'd have about 720,000 a year for somebody who has...
Very paltry.
But for the lawmakers, all you needed to do not necessarily was just for you to finish secondary school and earn a certificate having finished and maybe be about 30 or 35 years.
Yeah, and that's why they're all going into politics.
Well, many people are going into politics, but the percentage of those in politics is less than 6% of the entire populace.
Indeed.
It is just that because they take a chunk of what comes into government coffers. That is why we hear the cry. 2017, what we have for them is 125 billion. So these are issues. We've got to talk about figures because everything about our life is about figures.
Indeed.
I was born sometime. At this stage of my life, I have my age, in my 40s, as it were. So at some point, you'd have people talk about the fact that everything about human existence is figures. Daytime as time that is used to make assessment of it. If you woke up from 12 to 6, 7, you say that's the hours. So the point is, we should come to terms with the fact that lots of things have not gone well. So that simply means the budget for 2018, which is over 8 trillion, has not even been attended to because the ministries, departments, and agencies are also corporate in these corruption discourses. Now, let us give you another picture here, I beg you. We've talked about how much the lawmakers in the country earn. Could we switch gears and talk about how much are allotted yearly to ministries, departments, and agencies? Now, you're talking, for instance, about the military, where an extra 1 billion has been mooted to be released for them to fight insurgency.
Yeah.
As much as we may not be able to place a cap on how much is spent to protect lives and property, don't forget we have about $2.1 billion unaccounted for. All of these figures are things that we must actually talk about. Only 2 days ago, 2 houses in the UK were linked to Ike Ekweremadu. That's about to the tune of £4 million. Only a few days ago, 840 million naira was said to have been spent by Fani Kayode in 6 months. Somebody who gave an account in court. These are money, if properly appropriated, would have benefited you and I. Perhaps we would have smiled more than we're doing at the moment.
Indeed, but it does seem to have accrued to them while they were in office. Or what's your take?
Well, I think strongly that you are correct in that stead.
Yeah.
It accrued to them while they were in office. But how strengthened are the institutions of government? Now, the constable police officer doesn't earn up to 70,000 naira a month. And that is a constable that you tell time and again
lives and
who
property.
protects the life of somebody that makes maybe £1 million naira every hour. There is a tendency if
it's
such
not
a
commensurate.
person... The point is it's not commensurate. The wage system is one key area that must be addressed if at all you want people not to be corrupt. You have to let people know that if you occupy certain offices, especially when you risk your life, there are certain things you get that will make you feel, indeed, this is worth it.
Secure.
So I don't want people to come and say, whenever you work for government, you can't accept that because the people that you're qualified than are taking more home and doing less than you do.
Let's look at the government now. And how effective has the single treasury account, the TSA, been in tackling corruption in the country?
Well, to a great extent, I wouldn't want to give it just to the Buhari administration because the system, that's a single treasury account system, has been there before the administration came to the saddle. But it is part of what I said earlier about the non-compliance by ministries, departments, and agencies who until now have not come to defend their 2018 budget. They've been called time and again. They've been given excuses. And according to law, they should have defended their own budget by October of last year. So that means the presidency would have submitted the 2018 budget by September of last year.
You know what I hear about going to defend this budget?
Please let me know.
Is that most of the legislators, they want a cut.
Well, the point remains that we've had that time and again in the news, that those who are committee chairmen normally influence such cuts that come to them.
Yes.
But there are times you have to ignore the messengers and consider the message.
On the message.
The responsibility of the helmsperson of the respective ministries, departments, and agencies is to obey the provisions of law by coming to the law house, particularly the Legislative Assembly, to come and defend their budget. This is 2018 and this is March. They've not done that. So you were talking about institutions earlier. I need to say this, that if perhaps we're serious with fighting corruption, we need to strengthen institutions. And you don't strengthen institutions by mere words of mouth. Ibori could not be convicted. Over 100 cases instituted against him.
In Nigeria.
But let me say here that for the count of cases brought against Ibori, the British government spent the millions of pounds sterling to bring him to book. So the business itself of fighting corruption is as expensive as the business of fighting terrorism.
Indeed.
So if you look at all of this, government must first of all come to terms with the enormity of the task that has been placed at its doorstep and be sincere as much as just, because what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander.
Yes. Indeed. Now, one of the criteria for ranking by Transparency International in terms of corruption is the level of transparency in government.
Yes, please.
So that's government, procurement, and the award of contracts. How do you think we can improve on this?
Well, I think that we have an accountant general, we have an auditor general, and we have a minister of finance. And if there's any time I want to give commendations, perhaps I'll say that I should give commendations to Kemi Adeosun because of
Minister
our actions,
of Finance?
Most definitely, because of our action against Mone Ogwazo, the helmsperson of the Stock Exchange at some point. How do you pay yourself over 100 million whilst you're still in office? And I have to say that because the woman understood our onions, she was able to deal with that hook, line, and sinker.
Indeed.
You don't only believe things hook, line, and sinker. You have to deal with things, you know, in all ramifications.
Decisively.
Decisively, which she did. But if we move ahead and also want to talk about an area that will say that government needs to tidy things up, it has to do with really going after tax defaulters. But whilst government is going after tax defaulters, it is equally important that government live up to its responsibility to deliver on the dividends of taxpayers. Because we learned that between when Fowler took office and now, approximately about over ₦1 trillion has been able to come into the coffers of government, which is commendable. But if I drove my vehicle, you know, within the nooks and crannies of Lagos, as a taxpayer that I am, I'm not able to place something commensurate between the tax I pay and the potholes on the roads. And some of these roads are actually roads that belong to the federal government. That's collective
But if
taxes.
we're rated so lowly by Transparency International, why do we have a clear indication of foreign investors' confidence in Nigeria?
Well, I think it is also about the perception that they have of the government of the day.
Okay.
Muhammadu Buhari, the president of Nigeria, according to findings, hasn't dipped his hand in it as an individual. But I think he needs more of willpower, or perhaps he lacks the willpower to fight corruption and ensure that he's able to act without what has been touted clannishness and ethnic sentiments, as you can understand from what has been coming up in the news in the past weeks or months.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the reasons people are interested is first the man at the helm, and of course maybe the knowledgeable man
this
that
is where we're
his
going to
vice
have
president.
to draw a close. Adeniyi Kunu, researcher and social commentator. I wish we had more time.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with me on Africa this week.
Thank you very much.
Well, in a continent where integrity is fast becoming a scarce commodity, the menace of crookedness in Africa has grown to become an institution, sustaining poverty, obstructing development, and ensuring exclusion at all levels. While corruption is being fought and continues to fight back, advocacy, action, and prosecution will go a long way in breaking the cycle where politicians recklessly steal from the poor and the hungry in society. I have been your guide, Fadishala Shotingwa. Many thanks for watching, and bye for now.